A brighter matte QD-OLED matrix with some new features, but also same old problems. That's how the new Samsung S95D can be summed up in one sentence. It is the best TV made with this technology in the Korean manufacturer's catalog for the current year, and today we'll take a very close look at it. There will be precise measurements, direct confrontation with other screens, and tests of built-in features. So go ahead and use the chapters on the scroll bar because there is a lot to be covered. So let's get started. Briefly about the design, as this is something everyone can judge for themselves in the store. The screen looks great from all sides. On the front, a narrow bezel gives it a minimalistic beauty. As you can see, the edges are so slim that even the company emblem would not fit without adding a bit more space. The central base curves back, which gives the illusion as if the screen is levitating. Its tilt is not accidental. We can mount a device called One Connect onto it, which is Samsung's proprietary patent for making cables tidy. It works so that all the TV's electronics and inputs along with the power cable are routed out to an external box. It slightly resembles a gaming console. Such a solution brings a number of advantages. There is only one cable that must be connected to the TV, so even if you want to hang it on the wall and we have not prepared cable grommets beforehand, there is no need to connect the whole tangle onto it. One Connect box can then be placed anywhere close to the peripheral equipment, and if this equipment is located at the other end of the room, Samsung has longer cables available. However, if you want the simplest solution possible, we mount the box onto the base on the TV and connect it with a shorter cable. Thanks to the separation of the electronics from the screen, the latter does not have the thickening at the bottom characteristic of OLEDs, but it should be noted that the top of the matrix is thicker than usual. Speaking of inputs, we have 4 full-fledged HDMI 2.1 ports, however limited to a bandwidth of 40 gigabits per second. I say this as a formality because for a 4K matrix, this does not cause any significant limitation. There is also a dual tuner and USB inputs, one of which was located at the back of the TV next to the One Connect input. What caused the most controversy at the launch is the coating of the matrix. Few manufacturers nowadays use such deeply matte screens, but you have to admit that Samsung's solution is clever. In general, QD-OLED matrices do not enjoy good resistance to external lighting in the sense that their blacks fade heavily when we have light in the room, and especially when it falls on the TV. And here, the new screen changes nothing. As you can see, the blacks are similar to the predecessor and noticeably worse than on the LG G3, while the TVs are off. What has changed, however, is the suppression of direct reflections, which are now almost perfectly diffused. This comparison with last year's S95C does the job, doesn't it? Undoubtedly, if one has difficult lighting conditions, for example a window facing the TV, then the S95D will do better than any other representatives of the QD-OLED technology. However, what if we put the OLED from LG next to it again? Well, and this is where things start to get interesting. Without a doubt, on the LG G3, the reflections are more mirrored, so we can see the direct light sources on the screen more clearly. However, they are dimmer than on the Samsung's new matrix. They also don't spill over the screen as much as don't raise the black level. There is more contrast, which is basically associated with OLEDs. I think everyone has to make their own judgment here, because as for me, there is no clear favorite. Both solutions have advantages and disadvantages. The question is whether we are more annoyed by muffled mirror reflections or a faded image, because any scattered light degrades both blacks and color saturation, as you can see in this experiment. However, this new coating has another advantage that is not too obvious in testing. It can be cleaned wet without leaving marks. This with the S95C and S95B was very difficult, if at all possible. In general, it can be said that this screen is great for brightly lit rooms, as it provides up to 700 nits of brightness in SDR on an image with lower average picture level. This is more than many LCD TVs and definitely dispels the myth that OLED is not a good choice for daytime viewing. The S95D is also a great choice for the living room for a second reason. It's the TV with the best viewing angles we've tested so far. The drop in brightness at an angle of 45 degrees does not even exceed 10%, and there is completely no change in either hue or color saturation. You can see this for yourself. And now, let's turn off the lights and talk about what we like the most, the picture quality in cinema viewing conditions. In general, there is a rule that if someone watches in the dark and buys an OLED, he will probably never go back to an LCD TV. Blackness, which does not emit light, provides extraordinary plasticity and three-dimensionality of what we see on the screen. Scenes with subtitles, zero halo effect. Stars on a black sky, there you go. A single light effect that fills literally a few pixels on the screen can be bright, and next to it we can admire perfect blackness. On LCD TVs, even the high-end ones, there is always a but in this subject. Unfortunately, one shortcoming must also be mentioned on the S95D, namely the detail in blacks. their visibility is not ideal. It is not that they're crushed in blacks, but if you contrast the TV with another one that handles the subject without any problem, you will see that the deep grey tones are just very muted. This can be pulled out to some extent by professional calibration of the TV, but even so, you are left with a small peak in the gamma in SDR mode and in the EOTF curve in HDR mode, which results in a diminished visibility. Image purists are sure to pick this up, but those who pay less attention to quality will perhaps pass by indifferently, as it is not a disqualifying problem. Nevertheless, it should not be present in a TV of this class. As a counterpoint to black, let's now talk about the great light effects in HDR. Here, the TV literally dazzles. The maximum we were able to pull from the matrix was 1640 nits. Of course, on a test board, which is not very interesting because after all, no one watches test boards every day. So for a real evaluation, we will use scenes from the movies that are used by our team in their test procedures. The TV did not disappoint because in the first board tests, its effects oscillated around 1500 nits, while in the last one it achieved full 800. It should be mentioned here that this last scene from the Meg movie is extremely demanding because the entire surface of the sky in this shot shines brightly. As a rule, televisions are not able to generate as much power to sustain their peak performance on it, but it should also be noted that such bright scenes are extremely rare in movies. To broaden the context, we will now insert the results of other popular TVs from last year. So the effects we have here are at a very high level and are 10 to 20% higher than the results of last year's S95C. When we confront these two screens with each other, side by side, the difference can be easily seen. A significant advantage of the QD-OLED matrix over the WRGB OLED is that the image is formed on 3 color subpixels, so bright lights in HDR can be highly saturated in color. In scenes like this one, the advantage is immediately apparent. And talking about the color palette, here we have the full DCI-P3 and 88% BT 2020, and such results allow us to render extremely vivid colors that the creator has applied in the movie. I know what comment will immediately appear under the video. No Dolby Vision. I promised to record a longer video on this topic, but for now I will give a short answer. The brightness of this TV is so high that this is not that important in case of HDR productions. Dolby Vision is mainly dynamic metadata, which are needed when the movie has higher brightness encoded than the matrix can give out. However, nowadays most movies are created with brightness reaching 1000 nits. This is within the range of the TV capability, so no Dolby metadata will contribute anything here. And what about productions containing effects up to 4000 nits? Let's check it out on the same crazy movie. In the brightest scenes, you can see the advantages of Dolby technology of the LG G3, which has similar brightness but better tone mapping thanks to that technology. However, these are rare moments. For most of the movie, it is impossible to notice this deficiency, even in a direct confrontation, let alone when watching most Netflix content. There, HDR10 on the S95D looks the same as Dolby Vision on the LG G3. Finally, it should be noted that Samsung offers support for the alternative HDR10 Plus technology. However, I don't know of a movie released in this format that has such high light effects. So whether you play in HDR10 or HDR10 Plus, they look the same. On the subject of HDR, I still have to mention one more problem, namely brightness drops after the matrix warms up. This looks like a software bug, which will probably be resolved quickly, and I will not dwell on it in detail. It looks as if the brightness of the TV drops sharply for an unspecified period of time after displaying bright scenes in HDR for a long time. Sometimes we had to wait for a few minutes, but sometimes we ended up turning the TV off to restore the original performance. Let's talk about colors, which are a bit disobedient of the test TV. The fact that we get some distortions in the factory's filmmaker mode, such as an overly yellow-white or that unfortunate black detail problem, is not something that particularly surprises me. Having been involved in calibrating displays for over a decade, we've grown accustomed to the fact that every TV or even a particular unit has some shortcomings. Fortunately, calibration functions can refine such minor imperfections. Nevertheless, even after advanced calibration conducted with measuring devices, certain shortcomings still remain. And now the question is whether this should be considered a problem and a downside? Probably yes, but unless it is located next to another screen for comparison, it can be downplayed. Overly straw-colored greens, slightly less earthy skin tones and purple tinting of the blues are not immediately striking and will not bother in home use. What can be immediately noticed even by the least experienced viewer is posterization, also known as banding or non-smooth tonal transitions. Sometimes they result from an excessive compression of the material, but they can also be generated by the TV even on 4K Ultra HD movies. Here in fact, there is little to fault the S95D. Even in those more difficult dark test scenes, tonal transitions had very good smoothness and posterization was only occasional. It is worth noting, however, that the manufacturer uses a different technique to improve in this area. This involves splitting a single shade of color onto adjacent pixels, making the image slightly grainier up close, but from a normal distance this is not visible. It also looks good in sports content. The motion interpolation system allows interpolating image frames up to 120 FPS, so that all dynamic movements are clear. It must also be said that the system generates surprisingly few artifacts. At the recommended setting you see on the screen now, it looked very decent in our test sequence. After switching to some real game, I didn't notice once that the ball was clipping or dying as it happens on other TVs. Some people turn off the motion interpolation system or reduce its strength, which aims to solve the problem with the red ball dying but also increases the blur in movements. Here, even when it's set to 10, it was stable throughout. So the screen handles high-quality 4K HDR material fantastic, but what if we connect some poor Full HD material or even SD? I would rate the TV's upscaling as satisfactory. Textures are reasonably clear, but the edges are subject to aliasing, which makes them fuzzy. However, there is one big downside in contact with the lowest quality content. The so-called overscan cannot be turned off, which cuts the edges of the image of the screen. This causes not only the loss of parts of the image, but also a stronger blurring of details. Unfortunately, every year, everyone complains about this and the manufacturer does nothing about it. In the second, more important test, the TV was able to cope with posterization in a low-quality material. In the Clarity menu tab, we have a function that is called noise reduction, and it is able to hide such problems. We strongly recommend a low setting here, as a higher one will blur the entire image. To sum up, the low-quality content is good, but not great. It is time to comment on the last target group, which is of course gamers. Here, you need to put a lot of emphasis on the TV configuration because the default gaming mode simply distorts the picture to the extreme. Effects in HDR are excessively brightened, the image is extremely distorted, over-sharpened, and in short, everything that should not happen happens. Suffice it to say that the HDR mode does not even work properly, so it is impossible to correctly perform brightness calibration in the console. So the basic configuration is to set HDR10+ gaming and HDR game to basic mode. This will get rid of the artificial picture brightness and will be able to complete HDR calibration wizard. After that, it is still worth adding the color settings, but here I will not give detailed instruction because it will be a little different for each unit. Here, a professional calibration that will set all color parameters with great precision is very welcome. There are a few reasons why it is worth it. First of all, the image is of very high quality due to perfect blacks, high brightness, and wide color palette. Second, input lag is at such a low level that no one, not even a professional gamer, will be able to feel it. The on-screen response when you press something on the pad is immediate. Third, the pixel response time is incredibly low, which is typical of OLED matrices. As a result, there is no additional smearing in the dark scenes, which often happens on VA LCD matrices. Look how clean the pictures from the so-called U photos are. There is absolutely no smearing behind the object in fast motion. And finally, Samsung has a certain ace up its sleeve, namely motion interpolation system dedicated to game mode. It can convert any game to 120 frames per second, even if the console limit equals 30 or 60 frames. Due to this, games are smoother and display sharper movements. The feature is really useful and I think it's not talked about enough. It is impossible to turn on the motion interpolation system on TVs from other manufacturers in game mode, and even if we manage to do so, the input lag will increase to such a level that it will limit the enjoyment of the game. The only downside here might be the lack of Dolby Vision technology. The whites may appear overly bright in movies that do not have a manual HDR level setting or do not use the one built into the consoles. However, as in the movie category, the lack of Dolby in a TV of this class is a very small imperfection. The screen will work equally well with a PC. It is possible to get full 144Hz in 4K mode with a PC. Activating G-Sync and playing in variable refresh rate mode is also not a problem. I would describe the clarity of the text as good, although the contrasting edges have a characteristic coloring on the matrix with triangular subpixels. We seem to have reached the end of this long chapter on picture quality. It is a pleasure to test a TV that has so many qualities which are not overshadowed by some individual minor flaws. Now let's talk about more mundane things, namely the TV's functions. The built-in tuners perform well and the EPG interface is very convenient. We have a built-in multi-view function so we can calmly display several signal sources at once. What is unfortunately missing in some regions is USB recording. A great pity, because I know that for many people this is a very important thing. We can transfer the image on the TV both from the iPhone via AirPlay and via Miracast from the computer. We can also connect a keyboard, a mouse and Bluetooth headphones, however using them excludes simultaneous use of the TV's speakers. The remote control included with the TV pairs wirelessly, and there is no need to aim it at the screen. In addition, it allows voice search. The list of available apps is very complete, while as of today, Canal Plus and Paramount Plus are missing. However, I think that these shortcomings will be quickly filled. There is an Xbox application and ambient mode. The former allows for turning the TV into a game console if you have a good connection to the internet. That works because games are run in the cloud and the image from them is streamed to our TV. Ambient mode is Samsung's proprietary solution to turn the TV into a painting. It works great as the matrix with a deep matte finish and fantastic viewing angles creates the illusion that it's a real canvas, not a TV hanging on the wall. As for the TV's interface, it works quickly and stably. The manufacturer has made an effort to deliver a whole experience to the customer, as of interacting with Samsung's broader ecosystem, not just with a TV, so to speak. The new Daily Plus dashboard, where all the IoT devices available in the home are displayed, might serve as a good example of this. The second distinctive feature is getting rid of most of the typical buttons on the remote control. For example, we won't find an input key to change the input. Instead, we have to enter the home interface and then select the icon on the device, which must first be registered with a TV. This may seem unnecessarily elaborate, but we must admit that after doing this first setup, it works really well. Moreover, the S95D is one of the few TVs that pairs well with an external device, such as an NC Plus set-top box, which we can freely connect with just one remote control. That is fortunate, as opting for an external tuner is very likely, provided that the recording is missing. Finally, we move to the topic of sound. The TV has 42 speakers and the power is specified as 70 watts. In subjective listening, they sound good. The bass is a bit lacking, which is quite typical in TVs, while the high-pitched tones are quite clear. There is a dialogue enhancement function and support for Dolby Atmos. Unfortunately, there is also an unpleasant surprise for those who want to connect a soundbar or a home theater to enhance the viewing experience. The TV does not support DTS audio formats. As a result, if we are watching something from an external player and we have a soundbar or receiver connected to the TV, the audio in this format will not pass through the TV and we will have to connect our players separately onto the audio system. It's time for a recap. The Samsung S95D is the first 2024 model we are testing this season and definitely one of the more interesting TVs. Its performance is clearly better than the last year flagship, thanks to higher brightness and a better matrix coating that not only surpasses reflections much better, but also can be cleaned easily. The coating remains controversial due to the lack of deep blacks in daylight compared to WRGB OLED TVs, both for watching high-quality 4K HDR content with a wide color palette and strong lighting effects, or just Full HD and SD from TV that needs to be upscaled. The matrix is very bright and has fantastic viewing angles, so it's a great choice for living rooms with large expanses of glass. The TV also works well for dynamic content such as games and sport broadcasts. For gamers, there is a ton of features here, with the option to increase FPS at the top and the built-in Xbox app. The perfect TV? Well, not exactly. In many categories, there are silly bugs and limitations that could be removed with a software fix. However, I dare to doubt that this will happen. After all, the lack of support for DTS soundtracks, which makes it difficult to connect to the soundbar, is not a mistake, but a deliberate decision made by the manufacturer. So is the removal of the recording function. The topic of truncated picture edges with SD signals has been raised for every reviewer for years, so there is little chance that Samsung will ever address it. What I hope for, however, is a fix of the drastic drop in brightness in HDR when the matrix gets hot. I think there will be a quick response to this, so I would recommend the TV. If you would like to know even more about it, I invite you to visit our website, Choose TV soon.